Hey now everybody, Jamie here, and I'm going to do a little bit of show and tell today. So on our podcast, many times I've talked about how much I love to paint miniatures, and I've gotten many requests to show off some of the miniatures that I painted over the past 14 years that I've been painting. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to start off at the very beginning, show you the first miniatures that I painted and how bad they were, and how I've sort of developed over time up until now. So I want to sort of preamble this by saying that I'm not a tournament or competition or showpiece level painter. That's not my goal in this. My goal in this is for the hobby. I like to paint because it's an enjoyable, relaxing hobby. It's a de-stressor for me. And I feel really good when I finish a piece and I'm really proud of it. So that feeling of accomplishment really keeps me going. That's why I do it, because I love it. So I'm not the best in the world, but I'm happy with where I've gotten. I just want a good miniature that looks cool on the table when I'm playing the games with it. So let's get it on. I'm going to start off at the beginning and go all the way up to the present. Let's do it.
So before we get into looking at any miniatures, I wanted to show off my little paint rack here with all of my different paints on it. I use 3 different kinds of paints. And the first one here is Vallejo Model Air. This is a great paint. I use these in my airbrush, but I also use them with a brush because one of the biggest things about painting is you have to thin your paints. Vallejo Model Air is already thinned because it has to go through the airbrush. The second ones that I use are Citadel. Citadel paints, I like them the best because I like the colors best, but they're in these little pots and they're thick, so you have to thin your paints quite a bit. So there's a little bit more work with Citadel. I think they ultimately are the best paint for the color. The last one I have here are Reaper Master Series paints. These are the first ones that I started with because they're really cheap. And it shows. The color isn't as good, but it is inexpensive, and I use them more on like cheaper models, like board game models and that kind of stuff. So they are good for the cost. Okay, so we're starting off with the most embarrassing miniatures. This is the very first stuff that I ever painted. This is my Warhammer Fantasy Battles Dwarf Army. That was the first miniatures game we got into. I started off with the Battle for Skull Pass box set. It came with a ton of dwarves and a ton of goblins, and we got into playing the game, and over the span of a year and a half, I taught myself how to paint on these dwarves. All sorts of different dwarves, of course, like the plastic ones are from the Battle from Skull Pass box set, but these metal ones, these are the one with the big horn there. Also have one with the axe and the eye patch there. Those were metal. I got them from before and learned how to paint. So you could see the sort of evolution of my paint jobs, because this guy right here, this miner, look at that beard. It is just pure white, and the candle on his head is pure white. You can't even tell it's a candle. I painted it so poorly. But then this guy with the eye patch was a little bit later down when I started to learn how to paint a little better. I started to learn some techniques. So this is my very first army, very embarrassing looking army. They get better from here. Now, this is my second army. This is from War Machines, the miniatures game. I started with a Kaede Army. That's these red guys here. And I think actually I took some steps back in the quality of paints in this army. As a matter of fact, I am more embarrassed by this army than I am the last army. I learned how to dry brush around this time. And it was one of those things where I was like, oh my God, this is the way to paint. And then learn maybe a year or so later, no, that's not the way to paint. That's a lazy way to paint. You use it very sparingly. Dry brushing is, in fact, when you take a dry brush, literally dry brush, and you put a little bit of paint on it, and then you wipe all that paint off as fast as you can onto a paper towel until there's barely any paint on the brush. And then you hit the miniature really hard and really fast, and it gets a little bit of paint off onto it so that all of the paint is on the raised areas of the model and the recesses stay untouched. And I started doing this with like all of my metal, and it started to look more dirty than anything. So this is not a very well-painted army at all. As a matter of fact, these guys were all in boxes, so I never had to look at them ever again. So after this army, I learned how to use washes, what they used to call washes, now called shades. So this is the army where I learned how to use shades and washes instead of using crazy amounts of dry brush. Now, I still use dry brush on this guy, but what a shade is it's essentially a really, really thin and concentrated paint that comes out like an ink almost. And you take it on a brush and you put it all over the miniature, and it soaks into the recesses of the model, like the cracks and the holes, but it doesn't show up on the raised areas. So it makes the recesses really dark and the lighter areas not. So I started on this model right here using shades, and it isn't the greatest job ever. I'm a little happier with this than I am any of the War Machine things. I think this guy came out okay, but he still looks a little sloppy. I didn't quite learn how to do it quite yet. And I was still doing dry brushing. You can see there's dry brushing all over the top of that model, which didn't need to be done with the shades. But now let's move on to the stuff that I'm really happy about. Now, this part of the video is in no particular order. It's not in chronological order anymore because really I don't remember in what order I painted these things at this point. This game was Assassinorum Execution Force. It was a Warhammer 40,000 game, a single boxed game in which you play the assassins going in and trying to assassinate a Chaos Lord Sorcerer. And it was a cooperative game about stealth. It was an amazing, amazing game. There wasn't enough content in the box. That was the biggest problem. And Games Workshop tends to have a problem with reprinting anything ever other than Space Hulk, right? But this game had some absolutely amazing miniatures, and that's one of the cool things about Games Workshop is getting those boxed games. You get these amazing miniatures at a significantly lower price than if you'd buy them individually. So these guys are assassins, and they're not that... I wouldn't call these the best paint jobs ever. Mostly because all of them are very black. They're this dark gray color, and I did that because they were assassins, right? But there's such a cool amount of detail on these miniatures, particularly this guy with the skull helmet and the needle gun. He's got all this neat gear hanging off of him. It allowed me to give him a little bit of color. This fella here, he's got sort of the xenomorph skull head kind of thing. Also, he has a lot of interesting detail on him. And then this sniper guy, I just really like this sniper guy. His base is cool with the big pillar behind him that he's sort of hiding behind, and he's got his giant sniper rifle. I really liked these models and painting them. Not my best work, but I really like them in the overall. Now, this one is the Chaos Lord Sorcerer that came in the Assassinorum Execution Force box. And this one I'm really happy with. I mean, I could have done better, but I think he looked really cool with all the bronze armor and the awesome Sorcerer staff, and he's got his bolt rifle there. And one of the problems I have with painting miniatures is when I'm painting black, I don't know what to do with it exactly. And even to this day, I struggle with detailing black. You see a lot of models have, sort of a highlight on all of the raised edges of his cloak there, which I did not do. It's just a black cloak. And that's something that I still struggle with today, coming up with how I do that. Every time I do it, it doesn't look great. But overall, I like this miniature, and I thought he was fun to paint, and I'm happy with the result of this Chaos Lord Sorcerer. So we're talking a lot about Games Workshop. Let's talk about a couple board games here. So this one is Imperial Assault, the Star Wars board game. Han Solo and Chewbacca here. And actually, this is an example of when I use dry brushing the way I like to use it now. Dry brushing works best for me when it's beards or fur, and Chewbacca's covered in fur. So I would paint him brown, I would throw a layer shade over him, and then I would dry brush him a light brown, and I thought he came out really, really well. These two guys... they're not the best paint jobs ever, but they look a whole lot better when they're in your hand or when they're on the board than they do blown up to full screen size like we're looking at right here. That's the problem with miniatures. They always look better on the table than they do on a picture or in video. But I thought these guys come out pretty okay. One of the problems I have is painting eyes. I cannot paint eyes. If you notice, both Han Solo and Chewie here have no eyes painted. And I very, very rarely do that because I just can't get it right to make it look good. So I'd rather have them blank than poorly done, So I thought these guys were okay. And here's some more Star Wars Imperial Assault dudes. I thought this beast here, I can't remember what this beast is called, but I thought he came out pretty well. Did the same thing on this guy with dry brushing the fur of the creature and using a wash for the teeth and the claws and the spines coming off the back. Thought he came out okay. And here's an example of overusing wash. Didn't get it out of the recesses. It became dark and kind of pooled a little too much. So he came a little bit too dark in a sense. I still think he looks okay in hand, but This guy came out okay. He looks like a rebel fighter who's got a dirty shirt and got his pistol there. So I thought these guys were pretty cool. They work great for a board game. Now, this is a fella that I'm extremely proud of. I just really like the way this guy came out. This is the Terminator Psyker from Space Hulk, the board game, another box game from Games Workshop. I just really love the way this guy came out. I'm a sucker for anything Blood Angels and all the Blood Angels in that box set. I love painting them. This guy's a little weird because he's blue. Psykers are blue in the Blood Angels lore, but this guy came out just so well. One thing that I don't do very much, as I mentioned before, I'm not like a super heavy detail guy. I'm not going for tournaments. I'm not going for, show pieces. I just want them awesome table quality. So one of the problems I tend to have is I don't do the details of writing anything in the books. A lot of these Games Workshop miniatures, right? He has a book on there. He has a scroll on his knee, and I didn't write anything on it because I always feel like I'm going to screw it up. So I end up just letting them blank and letting my imagination say there's something there. Not the best, but I overall, I really love this miniature. I'm very proud of the paint job I did on this guy. And not to mention, Space Hulk is one of the coolest board games ever. I love Space Hulk. I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I got my start painting on Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Well, now we're into Age of Sigmar, the next step of the Warhammer Fantasy Battles. And these are the Stormcast Eternals. Now, this first one here on the right, he is from Warhammer Underworlds, Shadespire. And this other one is from the boxed game Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. And this was this guy was my very first Stormcast Eternal that I painted, and I really love painting armor. I think armor is so fun to paint, and I love the detail on the shield. I think just generally on both of these models, painting gold and making that look good is very difficult. I was trying to do a little bit of highlighting on this one with some silver highlights on it to sort of show like the gleaming of the sun on his golden armor. I just love the way these come out, particularly on the Shadespire, on the base. You can see like the grass and the leaves and the stone base. And then, of course, on the other guy, the basing I just did myself. I just did like a sand base and made it look like gravel, standing in gravel. I used to do that all the time on my miniatures. I would make them have gravel bases and that's it. And more recently, I started working on actually doing some cool basing. So I started basing like this more recently in the past few years. It has the flock base and also the grass there. Now, flock is actually you get it, Gale Force 9 is what I use. It's a little hockey puck. You pull it open, and it's got all of this, little organic grass-like clumps in there, and you break it apart, and you glue it to the base. And also, there are little grass tufts that you can get that have like an adhesive bottom. And it's just a little tuft of grass, and you take it off with a tweezer, and you put it into the base. And then that gives you like sort of an organic, grassy field base. And I think it looks pretty good. In this particular model, this is a Spirit Host from Age of Sigmar. And this is actually another talking point I wanted to bring up. This is the very first model that I tried using the contrast paints on. That's a new thing. It's very similar to a shade or a wash. These guys were just base colored white. And then I did this this white contrast paint over top, and I think they come out absolutely fantastic. It's like all of those ghosts is literally 30 seconds worth of work, just white, and then slather that crap on, and it looks like that. That's how easy painting is these days. The techniques are just so easy that you can make anything look great by using the contrast paints, by using shades, and learning a little bit of technique with dry brushing. It's such a wonderful hobby when you start to get just good enough that you're proud of your miniatures. And that's where I am now with my painting. I just have I look at models and I'm like, I'm very happy with that. And I would happily put that on the table and show that off. It makes me feel great. And an example of feeling great about your miniatures is this one. I love the Blood Angels. They're my Space Marine chapter of choice. And I just love how clean this guy was. I'm so proud of this one Space Marine that I painted just because the red looks so sharp on him. I thinned my paints properly. Just the details on him look good, but he's very, very lightly detailed. Not that much about him. Of course, we had like the gun and his holster and the little purity seal there, just the little details. And then look at his backpack there. It just looks good to me. It's like I said, it's not pro painted or anything. It's just table quality, but I just felt like I did a great job on this guy, and I'm proud of him. And I mentioned earlier in this video that I never paint eyes. Well, this is one guy where I was like, I'm going to paint the eyes, because Space Marine helmets, you don't have to paint pupils and iris and like any highlights or anything. This guy's just got some cool little eyes there. And I'm so proud of this guy. Even though he wasn't that hard to do, he just came out great for me. Now, this one is from my absolute 100% favorite Games Workshop box set game ever, Dreadfleet. I'm a sucker for naval combat games, and the models in this box were so amazing and so fun to paint. And I'm starting off with the easy one. This is the simple one, man. This is just a ghost ship. I just want to make it look ghostly. And this is another example of where I use dry brushing, and it actually worked in my benefit for this one, because I wanted it to look very ghostly and very like wispy in a sense. So this worked really well. And of course, dry brushing the base to make the water, like the surf and the, like the foam on top of the water look right. So this one I thought came out really, really well, even though this is an extremely simple one to do. This next one was a little more detailed. So this one is a whole lot more detailed. This giant ship is just so much fun to paint this thing. So many details on the aft castle there, and all the cannons and the towers, and then the sails and the masts. And again, I did a lot of dry brushing on this one that I don't think I would do second time around. As a matter of fact, I have a second copy of this game because I loved painting it so much. I want to paint it again now that I've gotten much better at painting. The sails I think are going to be much better. One thing I do love about this one is the figurehead there. It's just, I love the dude with the hammer. It's like the coolest looking figurehead, and I just think it looks neat in that bronze. I'm happy with these models, but I'm so excited that I have a whole other set that I'm going to go back through and paint again with my current skill set in painting miniatures. Now, this one is one of my more recent paints, as a matter of fact, and it's outside of my comfort zone. This is from Aeronautica Imperialis, which is a airplane dogfighting game. In the Warhammer 40,000 universe. This is something that I'm not used to painting at all, models like this, like airplanes. But I'm happy with how this one came out. I think it looks really cool. I think the color scheme is neat. With this one, I had to do a lot of masking. I would take there on the wings with that blue strip. I had to put some Scotch tape down and paint them so I could keep the lines crisp and clean, as though they'd be painted on a vessel like this. I really like the way this one came out. I think it looks neat. It looks great on the table when we play the game, and it is a fantastic game. Other than that, I really, really like this game. But I'm really happy with this one. Outside my comfort zone, but I think I did okay on that one. Okay, gang, so this is my favorite miniature that I have ever painted. This is the one. This is a barbarian from the box game Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. I love everything about it. I just think this guy came out perfectly. Like, the face looks perfect to me. It's just right. The belt buckle, all the skulls hanging off of his clothing, his shoulder pad, his sword, just everything about this guy came out just right. And whenever I want to show off a miniature, this is the one that I show off, because it just came out right. Every color I picked, I think, was right. Every wash I used was perfectly done. Again, it's not like pro painted or anything. This was not that hard to paint. It's just all of the stars aligned, and I was very proud of this guy. I just think he looks great. And the reason that is because it's a fantastic model. It's one of my favorite models that Games Workshop ever made. As a matter of fact, that is one of the things that makes you a better painter, working with amazing models. If you work with garbage models, your paints aren't going to look as good. It's going to be you're going to have to work a lot harder to make your models look great. But when you work with something of quality like Games Workshop puts out, you get better quality. It's effortless to make them look good. If you learn some technique, you get moderately good materials, you thin your paints, and you do your best to stay in the lines. And if you go out of the lines, you fix it. Those are the biggest things that you can do as a miniatures painter. Practice, 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 and do those things I just mentioned, and you will get good pretty quickly.
All right, that's it. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining me here today. Hope you enjoyed checking out my miniatures painting from way back in 2006 all the way up to today. I hope it inspired some of you out there to give it a try. This is a great hobby. It is so wonderful to start off not knowing what you're doing, to research the techniques, to practice them, get better, and then finally get some miniatures that you're really proud of. It's relaxing, it de-stresses, it's just a wonderful, wonderful hobby. So hopefully someone out there is going to check it out. And until next time, have a good one, everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody. If you've enjoyed this video, please do us a giant favor by subscribing to the channel and clicking that wacky bell icon. If you're into board games, miniatures games, role-playing games, we have a bunch of audio podcasts you might enjoy. You can find those at thesecretcabal.com or on iTunes and Stitcher.